This is my Greece41 scenario based on the Balkan Front game. I've just about finished it, so I thought I'd put together a little demo here. It starts with the April 1, 1941 German surprise turn after the Italo-Greek war has been going on in Albania since November of 1940. Let's have a look at the battlefield. So we get all of Greece, all of Albania, parts of Yugoslavia, Bulgaria, a little bit of Turkey. It continues on down to the south. And the map includes Crete, but I haven't actually done anything to include that in the scenario yet. So really we're only talking about the battlefield being on the mainland right now. So if we look at unit deployments, you can see we have Yugoslavs and Bulgarians and Germans and Greeks and British/Commonwealth, as well as Italians here. And the setup works. Whoops. The setup works pretty much the same as in all the other scenarios. That is, by default, we have historical deployments with optional free deployment for both the Axis player and the Allied player. If we look at the historical deployments, the first thing to remember, it's true for all the nationalities for both sides here, is that the maneuver units, basically the divisions, go into their historical positions to begin with. The non-divisional units, it's sometimes harder to track down exactly where they go, so they're randomly distributed. For the most part, that means they go to the appropriate front, and I think probably they always go to the appropriate front. For example, Greek non-divisional units, we pretty much know which ones were on the Albanian front, and we pretty much know which ones were not on the Albanian front, so we can divide them in that manner. But they are randomly deployed either with divisions that have specific setup hexes, or else, for example, Yugoslav border regiments are deployed randomly in border hexes. So that's true for all the nationalities here. But if we look more closely at the Greek and the British forces, so I deployed the British forces into more or less where they were actually when the German invasion started. For example, we can see that the Australians were not fully up into the Ali Akman line at that time when the invasion hit, so some of them are in the rear there, where other parts of the expeditionary force are farther forward, almost in Salonika. We have the bulk of the Greeks over here in Albania, which is where they were at the time. We have the Italians facing them here with the few units distributed elsewhere historically along the Albanian border facing the Yugoslav forces. The Bulgarians are set up pretty much where they were historically, but they won't really be taking part in the offensive as much as anything. I guess that's just for looks that I have them in place there. The Turks I've left out entirely. The Yugoslavs, the same thing. The divisions are in the regular places, and very, very importantly, the non-divisional units are randomly placed. So every time the game loads, they'll be in different places, and that can make a pretty big difference. Note also, by the way, that the German forces include one para unit, and that regiment, it's basically just parked there for convenience. The game will let the player know when it's available to drop within the normal game restrictions, maybe adjacent to the Corinth Canal or whatever. Also, it's very important to note that according to the Balkan Front rules, when this April 41 scenario begins, the fighting has been going on in Albania for quite a long time, and both sides have incurred pretty heavy casualties over there. So Balkan Front mandates that certain strength factors need to be removed from the map or flipped over to cadres or whatever. So I've slightly modified that, not a whole lot, but a little bit, so that the system looks at the units in Albania or on the Albanian front for both the Greeks and the Italians, and then proceeds to randomly subtract factors from units. That means that you might find a few units over there, maybe, that remain at full strength. You might find some that have been reduced to cadre strength, if they have cadres. And for the most part, though, you'll find that everybody has taken what might be considered a step loss. That is, a point or more of strength has been removed, and that gets applied randomly across the front every time the game gets started in order to match up with the appropriate number of factors that need to be removed according to the Balkan Front rules. So you never quite know how strong the units are going to be. Even if the divisions are in their historical positions, each time you start the scenario, you don't know which divisions are a little bit stronger, which divisions are a little bit weaker. So it just makes for some variation every time that you play. Now, as usual, I'll click back up here. As usual, every time you start the scenario, by default, we have the historical setup, but the Allied player and or the Axis player can do free setup if desired. It's up to the players. You might get tired of doing this over and over again with the historical setup and might want to fool around with it and try some free deployments, and that's up to the players to decide how they want to do it. In this case, we'll just go ahead and play with historical deployment to show how a couple things work. So let's click here. This is the surprise turn beginning, and note that the weather is clear in zone D and clear in zone E, as well as calm sea conditions. Now, actually, the weather table, which is a little bit different for Balkan Front, it doesn't quite match up with the other weather tables, does allow for the possibility of mud during this turn. And having fooled around with it, I have to say that mud makes it really rough on the Axis player to do anything remotely close to what happened historically. And so, at least for the time being, I have decreed that the mud will not happen on the surprise turn. The surprise turn will definitely be clear weather to get this going. And I should note that even with clear weather, it's still extremely difficult for the Axis player to keep up with the historical timetable and get to Athens as fast as the Germans actually got there. Anyway, so we'll close that. So now we're ready to go with the surprise turn. So the game turns the Axis surprise turn, clear weather. It's the movement phase. As usual, we start out now with limited intelligence turned off. So just like in the real game, you're free to examine the enemy stacks as much as you want and find out exactly what you're facing. We have the verbose mode turned on, so that we're going to get lots of messages that the system is trying to help you out in the play of the game, and if those eventually become too annoying, you can just turn them off. And we're also playing with uncertainty turned off, which means that strength will be as printed on the counters. There won't be any chance of variations in that. And as always, you can toggle those things on and off as you see fit. So when we look at the deployments here to start moving around, we could say, hey, it's the surprise turn. Let's get some of these Italian units going. But only German units can move during the surprise turn. So if you try to move Italian units or Bulgarian units, it's not going to work. You're not allowed to move them. So as we look at the German options, one of the key things that always happens the way the scenario works is because the Yugoslav non-div border guard units are deployed randomly at the start of every single scenario. you never quite know where they're going to be. And sometimes it works out better for the Yugoslavs, and sometimes it doesn't work out quite so well for the Yugoslavs. And this is a case here where, just by chance, this time around, no Yugoslav units have been deployed covering this gap here. For the Germans, that's a good thing, and that'll give us the opportunity to fiddle around with this a little bit. So if we look, for example, here at this German stack, we see the 2nd Panzer Division, which is historically in this hex, so it'll always be there. And in this case, it has been joined by the random deployment of the non-divisional Engineer Regiment. And if we poke around over here and see what's going on with the Greeks, so we've got a mountain division, which is there historically, plus a construction brigade, which landed here as part of the random deployment. And we have the Greek motorized division here as historical. And over here we have a border brigade that showed up. So we can kind of get the idea that for the Germans, knowing that we want to break through these lines, knock out the British forces as fast as possible, and get to Athens as fast as possible in order to win the scenario, we're probably going to want to try to zip right on through here. So let's grab this stack. Let's leave the engineers behind and just go with the combat motorized units. And you can see, by the way, that as we've seen previously in the other scenarios, the combat motorized units are in bold and the non-combat motorized units are not in bold. The underlying code is the same as in the previous scenarios, and the interface that allows the player to actually undertake the game mechanics, that's all the same. There's not much change. And for example, the same radio buttons for the same options for ground movement, regular ground movement, admin movement, operational railroad movement, strategic railroad movement, all those options are there. I should note that in this particular scenario, the Germans have no rail capacity, and I probably could have tweaked the code just a little bit to say, since there is no rail cap, that these radio buttons would not even show up, not be available. And if I try to click it, I can't click it because there is no rail capacity. I could have just left them off completely, but I figured it didn't really matter. Also, if a unit has already moved and you want to see the path, you can click here. If you want to do construction, repair, or demolition, you can click here. And that's unchanged from the previous scenarios. Anyway, so we'll take the 2nd Panzer Division, leave the engineers behind. We'll go here and we see that, as usual, shows that now we have expended 2 movement factors to get here. And by the way, keeping in mind that Greek zones of control don't extend across the border during a surprise turn. So we could say, for example, let's try to see if we can do an overrun here. Now, because we were playing without limited intelligence, it tells us, hey, that's not going to work. You try to get into an enemy-occupied hex. The odds would only be 3.7 to 1. That's insufficient for an overrun. So you have to cancel that attempt. If we were playing with limited intelligence, we wouldn't know that. It would work a little bit differently. So we won't do the overrun there. We'll just come on over to here, and let's see if we can do an overrun here. And it tells us now it's 11 to 1. So we could still cancel if we wanted to, but we can attempt to do the overrun, and sure, we'll do that right here. And it tells us what happened. We overran that unit and destroyed it. So we'll just stop the movement for that unit. Let's see if we have some more panzers up here. So we have the 9th Panzer Division. Let's just skip the non-motorized. That assault gun battalion was randomly deployed here as a non-divisional unit. So we'll take just the combat motorized units just to be tinkering around here. And we'll run them down here. We can see how the number of movement factors changes as we move along. And we'll just say that that's far enough. We'll stop that. I can always go back. I could say go back 1 hex. Whatever I want to do in that situation. Let's go back here. Oops, I seem to have lost all those guys. Oh, where did they go? Oh, they moved back into there. Sorry. Let's leave them behind. And let's go here. And we'll end that. And of course, I can move all my German units because it's the prize turn, but not my Italians, not my Bulgarians. But I'm going to end that phase. And that now takes us to the combat phase of the surprise turn. And in the combat phase, I click on any hex that I want to attack. So let's just try this one here. And now I can click on which units I want to attack. And we'll initiate that. And this gives us an idea of what's going on. 5.5 to 1 plus 3. We can look and see the specific information. And these odds and this specific information about the Greek forces only shows up because we have limited intelligence toggled off. Let's look at air support. For the Allied player, although they do have air support, it's not available during the surprise turn. For the Axis player, the 48 factors we'll throw in, just for the heck of it, I'm going to throw in 10 factors here, we'll see what happens. And we'll go ahead and resolve this combat. And because we said we wanted to see all the specific details, here's everything to be seen and exactly how the combat was done with the defender eliminated. So the 19th Motorized Division is completely gone. There is no defender retreat because there's nobody left to retreat, but the attacker does get to advance. So we'll click here for the advance, and we'll take just the folks from the 10th, and we will conduct the advance there. And we'll call that the end of the combat phase, even though, of course, I could attack all the other places that I wanted to. So we'll end that phase, and that ends the surprise attack turn. We'll go to the regular Axis game turn. So it's game turn 1, Axis turn, initial phase. The weather is still clear in D and E. The sea is calm. Rail capacity is 0. We close that. We're now still in the initial phase. No reinforcements, so we'll end that phase. The supply phase in the April 1, the turn 1, everybody's in supply, so we'll just end that phase. We won't worry about it. Ordinarily, we'd have to pay attention to who's in supply and who's not in supply, and the system would handle that for us, but everybody's in supply right now. And then we can do some movement in the regular phase. Let's grab these guys here, and let's see what's happening down here. We'll just go here, here, and here. Attempt to conduct an overrun. It's successful. We'll end that movement. And there you have it, just a short example of how the Greece 41 scenario works. And that's about it for now.